No one likes the Garuda in the kingdom. These people are treated even worse than commoners. So, on the very first day at the Magic Academy, one of the instructors already makes our protagonist a target by asking him an extremely difficult question that even the noble students have no idea how to answer. However, Van shocks everyone, including the professor, by answering it perfectly. Not long after, a senior student becomes irritated at the sight of Van. Furious that the Academy would dare accept a Garuda, she challenges him to a duel. In response, our protagonist effortlessly snaps her sword in half. This is because Van is actually hiding his true identity as the world's strongest and most deadly assassin who has enrolled in the Academy. But the moment our protagonist lays eyes on her, memories from his previous life come rushing back. She was responsible for countless deaths, and her future actions will eventually lead to the annihilation of his hometown and the slaughter of his family. This all stems from the kingdom's cruel system. Powerful mages and noble families exploit those born without magic, mocking them and labeling them as Garuda. The mage kingdom calls it order, but in reality, it is nothing more than institutionalized racism. However, the story begins by taking us 10 years into the past, to the kingdom of mages. Furuanes. Van is a legendary assassin, and on this day, the second prince has already set his ruthless plan in motion. His goal is to murder his own brother, the ninth prince, Heinz, and wipe out every magicless human and commoner known as the Garuda. Our protagonist is a man with no magic whatsoever. Imagine someone born with John Wick's deadly assassin skills. Even without magic, Van is an absolute monster. He confronts one of the kingdom's strongest knights and ends the fight instantly with a single palm strike to the nose, crushing his brain and leaving him drooling in his own blood. Another high-ranking mage steps forward, foolishly trying to buy time to chant a spell. The assassin shatters his jaw with a single blow, leaving him unable to cast anything before finishing him off with another palm strike. The prince looks at our protagonist like he is a demon from hell because he effortlessly defeated an A-rank swordsman and a powerful mage in an instant. Even so, the prince remains arrogant. He dismisses Van as nothing more than an assassin hired by Heinz. He even mocks Van's relationship with his brother, claiming that the Garuda are nothing but livestock and deserve to be treated as such. Van doesn't waste time arguing. He kills the arrogant fool on the spot. After completing the mission, Van reports back to Heinz, his closest friend and ally for the past 10 years. They have fought together to build a world where the magicless are no longer treated like worthless trash. Now that Heinz is finally close to claiming the throne, that dream seems within reach. Satisfied with his mission, Van returns to his village, hoping to reunite with his mother and younger sister, the only family he has left. The amulet they gave him has always reminded him of the home he wants to protect. But the moment he arrives, his world falls apart. The entire village is engulfed in flames. Our protagonist runs into the village. Corpses litter the ground, and the bodies of villagers hang from the trees. Seeing this, Van desperately convinces himself it is the work of bandits. Yet no matter where he searches, he cannot find his family. Everything he has done, every battle he has fought, has been to give them a better life. Then he finally sees her. His mother hangs lifeless from a tree. Time itself seems to stop. Before he can process the horror, a familiar voice calls out. It is his sister, Rina, covered in blood and barely able to hold herself together. She desperately tells him to run because the people responsible are coming for him. Our protagonist cannot understand what is happening. He wonders if this is the work of the remnants of the second prince's forces after killing him. However, his sister simply tells him it is fine. She begs him not to blame himself before urging him to run. But in that moment, a blade suddenly pierces through his back. The soldiers laugh, believing they have finally eliminated the kingdom's greatest threat. Despite the fatal wound, Van refuses to lose his composure. Consumed by rage, he asks the only question that matters. Who is responsible for this? The answer leaves him speechless. It is Heinz, the very friend he helped place on the throne. The same friend who has now ordered the extermination of every Garuda. Naturally, our protagonist is left in complete disbelief. The man of the hour calmly steps forward. Our protagonist listens as Heinz blames him for everything. According to Heinz, people like Van can kill mages without leaving a single trace, making the Garuda too dangerous to exist. For the safety of the kingdom, he has decided to wipe out every last one of them. Betrayed by the man he trusted most, Van refuses to die quietly. He swears to kill Heinz, even if it costs him everything. Ignoring everyone else, he unleashes the ultimate technique of the secret assassin arts and charges straight at him. Heinz responds with a massive spear of magic, giving Van the full Toji treatment as it tears straight through his chest. His traitorous friend turns to leave, remarking that Van is still stubborn even in death. In the end, his injuries are simply too severe. Defeated, Van collapses. As Van's life slips away, a mysterious creature from the pendant around his neck appears before him. The beast offers him one final chance. When Van opens his eyes again, he is no longer lying on the battlefield. He is back home. Rina rushes in, alive, and smiling, happily congratulating him on turning 15. That is when the truth finally sinks in. Van has regressed 10 years into the past. At first, he thinks it is nothing more than a nightmare, but everything feels far too real. More importantly, his reflexes and instincts are as sharp as ever, making him realize that all the memories from his previous life, along with every assassin technique he mastered, remain intact. When Rina asks if everything is alright, Van simply shakes his head and joins his family as they celebrate his birthday. Elsewhere, a young mage sets out to hunt a group of so-called heretics. The young mage notes that her duty is to protect the citizens of the kingdom. But the lead knight points out that the area ahead is Garuda territory. Seeing her confused, he tells her she will learn the truth at the Magic Academy, and claims that the Garuda are nothing more than livestock. The girl clearly does not share that view, but she keeps her thoughts to herself. Right now, completing the mission is all that matters. Meanwhile, Van is busy enjoying his birthday celebration with his family when it suddenly hits him. He has turned 15. Every Garuda boy must choose his future at the age of 15. He can remain in the village and take a low-paying job, leave for manual labor, or become a mercenary. Van explains that although the Garuda possess no magic, they are blessed with overwhelming physical strength, much like Toji. Their lack of magic also makes them undetectable by mages, making them exceptional scouts. Van admits the path is incredibly dangerous, but it comes with generous rewards from the kingdom. In his previous life, choosing that very path is what led him to meet Heinz. Their celebration is suddenly interrupted, and Van remembers something crucial. He urgently begs his family to leave the village for a while before sprinting off to confront the Purifiers, an extremist group branded as heretics. They believe the Garuda are children of the devil and deserve to be exterminated. On this very day, those fanatics carried out the massacre that destroyed his village. Back then, Van could do nothing but hide with his family. This time, however, Van refuses to hide. Meanwhile, one bald fanatic is busy preaching nonsense about purification. Unfortunately for him, he becomes our protagonist's first target. Van explains that the easiest way to kill a mage is to bypass their perception and destroy either the brain or the spinal cord before they have a chance to react. Van strikes first, secures the kill, and then deliberately reveals his presence. Moving with terrifying speed, he uses the enemy's own mana-infused weapon to break through a mage's defensive barrier. Another mage launches a spell, but Van closes the distance before it can hit and drives a devastating blow straight into his stomach. Only 3 enemies remain. Just as Van prepares to finish them off, one of the surviving mages grabs a woman hostage and threatens to kill her unless he surrenders. At that moment, Van realizes he has made a critical mistake. He does not bother checking if there are more enemies nearby. Surrender means certain death, but he has no other option. He slowly raises both hands in the air, only to be slammed to the ground. The entire group piles onto him at once, mercilessly stomping him without holding back. One fanatic insists they should kill him immediately, convinced the boy is death itself and that sparing his life will only bring disaster. Just as they are about to finish him off, a young woman suddenly arrives. The mage casts a powerful ice spell, freezing every fanatic in place before calmly declaring them under arrest. Van is caught completely off guard. In his previous life, reinforcements never arrived this quickly. The woman and her squad swiftly secure the captured heretics, but her attention soon shifts to Van, our boy who managed to defeat 3 of them by himself. Clearly impressed, she explains that one of the men Van killed possessed enough power to burn the entire village to ashes. She had intended to eliminate him carefully to prevent unnecessary destruction, but Van had already taken care of him. After learning his name, Helene becomes even more interested in him. She suggests that he enroll at the Royal Magic Academy, the same institution that has produced countless legendary heroes and renowned mages. Van cannot understand why she would choose someone like him. Instead of responding, she suggests they move somewhere quiet to continue their conversation. Once they reach a secluded area, our protagonist is about to ask what she wants to discuss, when Helene suddenly says it is the perfect place to kill someone. Without warning, she activates a spell and fires an ice arrow straight at him. To her surprise, Van has already disappeared. He uses no magic and no visible technique. In the blink of an eye, he appears directly behind her, standing perfectly within her blind spot with a fatal strike ready. Just before delivering the finishing blow, Van stops. He calls out her poor acting, pointing out that she never truly intended to kill him because he never sensed any bloodlust. Helene smiles, impressed. Our boy already carries himself like a veteran warrior. It amazes her that someone without magic can stand against mages through pure skill alone. She then tells him that the future of the Garuda could change completely if he joins the academy. Van quickly realizes she is referring to the Knight Conferment System. She nods and explains that the Knight Conferment System rewards outstanding students for exceptional achievements. Through this system, even commoners can earn knighthood and establish noble houses. Since the land granted to a knight is their place of birth, Van alone could raise the status of his entire district. Our protagonist is stunned. He never considered that possibility before. Although he still has his doubts, there are a few things he wants to know first. Curious, Van tells her he has 3 questions. She simply nods, letting him know she is listening. First, he points out that admission requires a recommendation from a noble. Helene immediately offers to write one herself. Van is caught off guard by how quickly she responds. Second, he asks how someone without magic could possibly belong in a magic academy. Helene admits it sounds strange, but explains that many people earned knighthood not because they possessed overwhelming magic, but because they discovered new magical principles. from potion making to researching magic circles. She explains that the study of magic extends far beyond simply casting spells. In other words, all Van has to do is make everyone recognize his strength. Realizing that everything now rests on his shoulders, Van asks one final question. What does Helene gain by helping him become a noble? She can tell from Van's tone that he doesn't trust her. Still, Helene simply replies that she has her own reasons, but has no intention of revealing them. Before Van can question her any further, his sister rushes over after hearing that he fought off a group of dangerous people. Our protagonist apologizes for making her worry. His little sister simply pouts. Van is caught off guard when she suddenly hugs him. She explains that he always brushes things off, and that habit constantly makes both her and their mother worry. Meanwhile, Helene watches the siblings. She tells Van that he doesn't have to trust her. At the same time, she gives him a reason to fight by encouraging him to become a knight so he can protect his family. She even swears in the name of the Steinert family that she will make sure it happens. Several days later, Van's mother is initially worried about his fight with the heretics, but she relaxes after learning that her son is the reason so many people survived. Eventually, Van tells his family about his plan to travel to the capital and enroll in the Royal Magic Academy. Both Rina and his mother are horrified. The Magic Academy is a place meant for mages. Van reassures them that he will prove the Garuda are not inferior to anyone. Our protagonist has spent days thinking about it, and he admits that he has no idea how to save everyone. In his previous life, things only worked because he fought alongside Heinz, who had a real chance of becoming king. Although Van still doesn't know Helene's true intentions, her offer has opened the door to an entirely different future. Having already died once, Van no longer hesitates to seize even the smallest chance at hope. He declares that he will erase the discrimination the Garuda suffer throughout the kingdom. In his mother's eyes, her son now speaks with the same unwavering determination his father once possessed. Knowing how stubborn her son is, his mother finally accepts his decision and lets him choose his own path. Noting that he inherited that stubbornness from his father, there's only one problem left. The academy's tuition fees are ridiculously expensive, especially in this goddamn economy and considering their current situation. Just when everything seems impossible, Helene rewards Van with the bounty for his contribution during the mission, instantly solving the problem. Before he leaves, his mother reminds him never to let the world's cruelty harden his heart. Our protagonist promises to do his best. Van bids farewell to his family and sets off, carrying all of their hopes with him. After moments later, he stands before the magnificent Royal Magic Academy. This is where his story truly begins. Our protagonist stares in awe at the Academy's breathtaking grandeur, while applicants bustle around with excitement. One candidate confidently introduces himself as Alexis von Hohenberg of the prestigious Hohenberg family. The guards immediately bow before the young master. Another girl arrives carrying a recommendation from the Duchess of Krausenberg, another influential noble family. When Van steps forward to register, a guard suddenly yells at him without warning. The elite applicants immediately notice his crimson eyes and recognize him as a filthy Garuda. Van has just arrived, but the discrimination has already begun. Remaining calm, Van politely explains that he has done nothing wrong and is only here to apply. The guard mocks him, claiming he does not even understand where he is standing. Van calmly reminds him that this is the Royal Magic Academy, a place where anyone is allowed to take the entrance exam regardless of their social status. Enraged by such a simple response, the guard shoves a spear directly in Van's face, refusing to let a Garuda take the examination. Van sighs inwardly. Things have become troublesome from the very beginning. He could easily defeat the guard, but causing a scene in front of all the examinees would ruin his reputation before the exam even starts. Fortunately, another guard with more common sense steps in, trying to stop his partner from embarrassing the academy in front of everyone. For a brief moment, Van is impressed that someone is finally willing to hear him out. Unfortunately, that hope is shattered almost immediately. The guards who had been treating the noble children like royalty immediately look down on Van with open contempt. They mock him as nothing more than another delusional fool, proving that the prejudice against the Garuda runs deep. One of them reminds Van that the academy claims not to discriminate based on a person's background. However, there is one condition. Every applicant must possess a recommendation from a noble to everyone's surprise. Van calmly presents a recommendation letter, bearing an authentic noble seal. The moment the guard recognizes the Steinard family crest, his expression changes completely. Instead of accepting the letter, he accuses Van of forging it, insisting that no noble in their right mind would ever recommend a Garuda, certain he has caught a criminal. The guard reaches for the letter, intending to arrest Van for a capital offense. Van refuses to let him take it. In one swift movement, he grabs the guard and throws him to the ground with a heavy thud. The second guard can only stare in disbelief, while the other examinees watch the scene unfold in complete shock. Neither guard can believe that our protagonist has effortlessly overpowered a fully grown adult, and they quickly dismiss it as nothing more than a lucky fluke. The commotion soon attracts one of the academy's examiners. Both guards immediately apologize before explaining that a Garuda is attempting to enroll. The examiner turns his attention to Van and asks for his identity. Van introduces himself as an applicant personally recommended by Helene Steinard. The name alone catches everyone's attention. After carefully inspecting the letter, the examiner confirms that both the seal and signature are genuine. his attitude changes instantly. He respectfully bows to Van and personally invites him inside the academy. The reputation of the Steinard family speaks for itself, and the crowd immediately becomes curious. Everyone begins wondering how a magicless Garuda managed to earn a recommendation from such a prestigious noble house. Feeling uncomfortable under so many curious eyes, Van realizes that Helene must come from an incredibly influential family. Once inside, Van quietly surveys the academy grounds. Every student gathered here is among the kingdom's finest talents. He soon recognizes several faces from his previous life. There is Dietrich, who will one day become the kingdom's legendary swordsman. Nearby stands Shale, the future Grand Mage of Flames, along with Lunaris, the blonde girl destined to become the Maiden of Might. Nearly every legendary hero from his former life once studied at this very academy. Back then, Van was nothing more than a cold-blooded assassin who fought from the shadows while heroes stood in the spotlight. But when the royal family descended into a brutal struggle for the throne, those very heroes eventually sided with the corrupt princes. In the end, Van personally eliminated every one of them. Now, instead of hunting them, Bro's aura is on a completely different level. Now he must compete alongside them. This time he intends to change the kingdom's future before history repeats itself. While lost in his thoughts, a noble student rudely calls him out for standing where he pleases. Confused, Van calmly replies that he has every right to stand wherever he wants. The noble, however, takes offense and begins boasting about his prestigious family as if that alone settles the matter. Van briefly considers lowering his head to avoid unnecessary trouble. His mother's gentle words echo in his mind, reminding him not to let the world's hatred corrupt his heart. He also remembers Heinz once telling him that bowing to those who despise him would never earn him respect or equality. A person must carry themselves with dignity. Unfortunately, the arrogant noble refuses to back down and even grabs Van. That single mistake ends the confrontation. Van calmly states that the noble started it before grabbing both of his arms and forcing him onto his knees. The technique he uses is known as harmony, a martial art that redirects an opponent's strength while blending it with one's own to completely control their movements. It is the very same technique Van used against the guard moments earlier. With the noble now kneeling helplessly before him, Van even extends a hand to help him up, humiliating him even further. Unable to accept defeat, the furious noble immediately begins casting a spell to attack. Before the fight can continue, a calm voice orders everyone to stop. The arrival of Prince Heinz instantly silences the entire area. He reminds everyone that the Garuda are allies of the kingdom and should not be treated with such hostility. The noble hurriedly apologizes. Rather than acting superior, Heinz humbly introduces himself as just another examinee and asks everyone to treat him the same as everyone else. He then offers the same kindness to Van. But Van is too busy processing the fact that Heinz also graduates from this academy in the future. The other students are equally shocked. None of them expected the ninth prince to personally take the entrance examination, and his friendly attitude toward a Garuda only raises his reputation even higher. Van remembers a conversation from his previous life, when Heinz casually mentioned attending the academy years ago. Now he realizes that memory was completely true. Mistaking Van's silence for nervousness, Heinz smiles warmly and admits that even he feels anxious because the academy's entrance exam is notoriously difficult. He reaches out his hand and encourages Van not to feel intimidated, suggesting they simply do their best together. Van stares at that familiar smile with cold suspicion. He knows better than anyone that behind Heinz's gentle appearance hides a calculating monster. For a brief moment, our protagonist even considers killing the prince on the spot, but doing so would destroy everything he hopes to accomplish. No matter how deeply he hates the man responsible for his family's death, he forces himself to suppress his emotions. Van's expression leaves Heinz visibly confused, but without saying another word, Van simply walks away. He has no intention of becoming friends with the man he knows will one day become his greatest enemy. Left standing alone, Heinz quietly watches him leave, while the surrounding noble candidates remain baffled. Many of them still refuse to see the Garuda as equals. Moments later, the examiner's commanding voice echoes across the academy grounds, ordering everyone to be silent. He announces that registration has officially ended. The examinees are then instructed to prepare for the entrance test, which will take place in the infamous Forest of Shadows. The name immediately catches Van's attention as the examiners gather outside the mysterious testing grounds. The supervisor welcomes the examinees to the Forest of Shadows, the location that will serve as this year's entrance examination site. He reminds everyone that the academy exists to nurture the kingdom's finest talents, producing elite mages capable of shaping the nation's future. Because of that, there is no place for those who lack the necessary ability. The first test is designed to measure each candidate's natural magical aptitude. Deep within the Forest of Shadows, a land overflowing with mana, grows a rare plant known as the Heaven's Tear Flower. Every examinee must collect 10 of these flowers before the exam ends. Of course, the task is far from simple. The forest is home to countless magic beasts that have absorbed the dense mana surrounding them, making them far stronger than ordinary animals. Van expected a difficult entrance exam, but he never imagined he would be fighting monsters from the very beginning. The supervisor continues explaining the rules. Candidates are strictly forbidden from interfering with one another. although forming temporary parties is allowed. Even so, teamwork offers limited benefits, because every individual must personally collect 10 flowers to pass. Building a large group could easily become more of a burden than an advantage. The time limit lasts until sunset. Finally, an examiner distributes special badges to every participant. If anyone finds themselves in mortal danger, crushing the badge will summon an examiner to rescue them immediately. However, doing so also results in automatic disqualification. With the rules explained, the examination officially begins. The candidates rush into the forest. Some quickly form alliances, while others reunite with old friends, leaving Van completely alone. He doesn't mind in the slightest, in fact, he prefers it that way. As he receives his badge, the supervisor watches him with an unusually intense gaze before allowing him to enter the forest. Unbeknownst to Van, a few candidates quietly follow behind him. Unlike everyone else, Van wastes no time searching for easy prey. He immediately confronts a magic beast with moderate mana reserves. These creatures possess physical abilities far beyond those of ordinary humans, making them dangerous opponents for inexperienced mages. As the beast lunges toward him, Van recalls that since becoming an assassin in his previous life, most of his targets had been humans. It has been a long time since he last fought a magic beast. Even so, his body hasn't forgotten. Instead of drawing a weapon, Van steps forward and delivers a single devastating punch using the beast-slaying arts. The technique concentrates the user's momentum into one explosive strike, generating enough force to penetrate a monster's body from within. While landing the attack on a skilled human opponent is difficult, reckless magic beasts charge head-on without hesitation, making it the perfect finishing move. The creature collapses instantly. Van quietly remembers that even during his years as an assassin, he was forced to master techniques for hunting magic beasts whenever missions required it. What he also knows is that someone has been watching him this entire time. Pretending not to notice, Van calmly walks away. Hidden nearby, the two students following him stare in disbelief. Neither of them can accept that a magicless boy defeated a magic beast with raw strength alone. Instead, they convince themselves that Van must have relied on poison or some other underhanded trick, believing such cheap tactics would never work against them. One of them points out that attacking another examinee is against the rules. The other simply scoffs. In his eyes, the Academy would gladly overlook Van's death, after all. No one truly wants a Garuda to pass the entrance exam. On top of that, Van publicly embarrassed the prince, giving him what he believes is the perfect excuse to eliminate him. Elsewhere, the supervisor secretly arrives at a heavily guarded cage containing a powerful magic beast. When the guards hesitate, questioning whether releasing it is really a good idea, the supervisor assures them that the creature is under magical control and can be directed toward a specific target. His target is Van. Since the Academy cannot openly reject a candidate carrying a legitimate noble recommendation, he intends to solve the problem another way. If a Garuda successfully passes the exam, he believes it will disgrace the Academy's reputation. To him, a Garuda deserves nothing but a miserable fate. The guard worries that releasing such a dangerous beast could endanger the other examinees. The supervisor dismisses the concern, explaining that Van is traveling alone, making it unlikely for anyone else to get caught in the attack. With that, he unlocks the cage and orders the enraged monster to hunt down the filthy Garuda and protect the Academy's so-called honor. In the next chapter, the purple-haired examiner begins sensing that something about this year's examination feels wrong. The supervisor soon returns, pretending nothing happened, and casually asks whether anything unusual has occurred. The examiner replies that everything seems normal so far before asking where the supervisor disappeared to. The man simply claims he was making preparations, but the sinister look on his face immediately raises the examiner's suspicions. Back in the forest, Van reaches the deeper region and finally discovers the beautiful Heaven's Tear flowers. All he needs to do is collect them and leave before he can pick a single flower, however. He calmly tells the people hiding nearby to stop lurking and show themselves. The two students emerge from the trees, shocked that Van detected them the entire time. One mocks him by claiming our protagonist must have the nose of a hunting dog. Completely unfazed, Van calmly replies that he has simply grown accustomed to cowards who prefer attacking from behind. However, he quickly realizes he shouldn't say that, since he is an assassin and usually does the exact same thing. The pair ignore the insult and continue mocking him, insisting that a magicless Garuda has no place in the Academy. Determined to prove it themselves, they prepare to force Van out of the examination by any means necessary. Van immediately calls out their twisted logic, pointing out that this has nothing to do with the Academy. The real reason they're targeting him is because their wounded pride can't accept being humiliated by a Garuda. Taking a fighting stance, Van calmly declares that he'll beat that arrogance out of them himself. Enraged by his confidence, the two nobles begin casting their spells. Van quickly analyzes the situation and realizes that one is a spell-casting mage, while the other is a blade mage who channels mana through his sword. Magic users are generally divided into three main combat styles. The first are traditional mages who fight with spells. The second are blade mages who enhance their weapons with mana. The third are monophists, warriors who strengthen their own bodies with mana. A team combining different combat styles is usually far more dangerous because each fighter covers the other's weaknesses. As Van studies their movements, he notices something important. Despite their confidence, neither of them seems to have ever killed anyone before. Even so, they genuinely intend to kill him. Van has no intention of returning the favor. He explains that if a Garuda dies, the Academy can easily dismiss it as an unfortunate accident, but if the child of a noble house is killed, their entire family would stop at nothing to hunt down the culprit. An innocent Garuda could end up suffering the consequences. Van has no desire to repeat the bloody path of his previous life. This time he wants to live in the light. Instead of using lethal techniques, he decides to break their fighting spirit and force them to surrender. His calm expression only infuriates them further. The mage unleashes a wind spell called Zerwind, sending razor-sharp gusts flying toward Van. Although Van narrowly dodges the attack, a shallow cut appears on his body. The noble proudly boasts that the strike was meant to kill and begins bragging about his family's secret technique, an invisible wind blade impossible for ordinary people to see. Confident that victory is already his, he orders Van to kneel and beg for mercy. Van simply shrugs and calls the spell underwhelming. He even mocks House Valtrake by asking whether their famous techniques amount to nothing more than gentle breezes. The insult lands far harder than any punch. Blinded by rage, the noble immediately casts a stronger spell, Zerwind Tempest. The enhanced attack tears through the surrounding forest with countless invisible wind blades. Even so, Van avoids every single strike. He isn't seeing the attacks. Instead, years of experience allow him to read his opponent's killing intent before each attack is launched. The moment he closes the distance, our protagonist drives a crushing punch into the mage's stomach, knocking him unconscious with a single blow. Seeing his partner defeated, the blade mage rushes in, convinced he can finish the fight himself. Van calmly studies his stance. A sword is certainly more dangerous than bare fists, but the real threat lies in the blade itself. Rather than trying to stop the sword, Van waits for the perfect moment before darting inside its range. He grabs the swordsman's wrist, redirects the momentum of the attack, throws him completely off balance, and finishes the exchange with a precise chop that knocks him to the ground. The mage struggles back to his feet, but Van warns him that if he attacks again, he won't continue holding back. This time, the boy's courage disappears. Ready to surrender, he pleads for the fight to end. Before anyone can say another word, Van suddenly senses an overwhelming presence approaching. His instincts scream that something is terribly wrong. Without hesitation, he orders both nobles to run. A massive crimson beast bursts into view. The terrifying monster crashes into all three of them with a single charge, launching them through the air before they slam into the ground. As Van regains his footing, his expression hardens in disbelief. Standing before them is a hell boar, a high-ranking magic beast that has absolutely no business appearing in the Forest of Shadows, known as the Cursed Fang. A hell boar possesses devastating mana-infused charges powerful enough to rival siege-class magic. Just a few direct hits are enough to kill even skilled fighters. Realizing the danger, Van immediately orders the two nobles to escape while he buys them time. One of them tries to run, but the other remains where he is, not because of courage. His leg was crushed during the Hellboar's charge, leaving him completely unable to stand. Van quickly realizes the impossible situation. Carrying the injured boy would only slow everyone down, and a Hellboar is notorious for relentlessly pursuing marked prey. Their other option is to crush their emergency badges and wait for the examiners, but rescue may not arrive before the monster finishes them off. Believing himself to be a burden, the injured noble tells his friend to leave him behind. As a member of House Valtrike, he insists on facing death with dignity rather than dragging someone else down. His friend refuses. Abandoning a comrade would disgrace his own noble family just as much. Watching the two nobles argue over honor leaves Van completely speechless. Even so, he orders them to activate their badges while he distracts the Hellboar. Neither of them agrees. Both refuse to accept failure, convinced that retreat would bring shame upon their families. Rather than surviving in disgrace, they would rather stand their ground and fight to the bitter end. Their stubborn pride only frustrates Van even more, especially when every second they waste brings the Hellboar one step closer. He shouts that if they truly want to fight, then they should fight to win, because that is what a noble's honor is supposed to represent. Instead of understanding his point, they continue mocking him as nothing more than a Garuda. Meanwhile, the Hellboar has been surprisingly patient, giving them enough time to argue. At the same time, the supervisor seems unusually calm, noting that it is about time. Confused, the examiner asks what he means. The supervisor brushes off the question and instead asks whether anyone has sent out a distress signal. When he hears there has been no response, he becomes even more pleased. He believes Van was crushed before he even had the chance to call for help. At the start of the exam, every participant had their belongings confiscated. The supervisor secretly retrieved Van's backpack and placed it in front of the Hellboar, allowing the beast to lock onto his scent. Certain his little scheme has already sealed Van's fate, he believes the only thing left is a report confirming the boy's death. The man quietly laughs to himself, acting like some master strategist, while the examiner wonders what is going on. Back on the battlefield, the powerful Hellboar is finally within striking distance. Van quickly comes up with a plan. He will launch the first attack and create an opening for the other two to follow up. Unfortunately, the prideful noble brats refuse to take orders from a Garuda. They do not have much time to argue because the hell boar is already charging. Spotting the perfect opening, Van bursts forward with incredible speed. He targets the beast's weak point and unleashes Collapse Strike, causing the massive creature to stagger. Even the nobles are stunned by the force of the blow. Retribution is a martial technique that predicts where an enemy's next movement will begin. Four-legged beasts like the hellboar naturally move their heads first before the rest of their bodies. Van exploits that habit and drives a powerful piercing strike into that exact moment of movement. The attack lands, but it is not enough to kill the beast. Although Van still possesses all of his combat knowledge, his current body is 10 years younger and lacks the strength and endurance he once had. Defeating a high-level monster in a single strike is no longer possible. Without wasting another second, he orders the others to attack. The Wind Noble unleashes a barrage of cutting winds, while the Magic Swordsman follows up with a powerful slash. Unfortunately, the sword cannot even pierce the beast's hide. It is like striking solid rock. Their combined assault accomplishes nothing except making the hellboar even angrier. Realizing what is about to happen, Van immediately orders everyone to get down. The oversized beast charges forward like a living battering ram, tearing through everything in its path. Thankfully, none of them are hit directly. Even the arrogant nobles survive. One of them reveals that he managed to alter the hellboar's path slightly with wind magic, saving everyone from a fatal impact. Sadly, the magic swordsman's attack proved almost completely useless. Even so, Van refuses to give up. He tells them they only need one more attempt. At first, it sounds like suicide, but he confidently declares that the next strike will send this oversized boar straight to hell. The Valtryke noble thinks Van has completely lost his mind. They could not even break through the monster's magical defenses. Ignoring the doubt, Van gives him practical advice. Instead of relying only on wind blades, he should gather stones and launch them with the wind. A concentrated piercing attack is far deadlier than countless shallow slashes. Curious, the noble asks what Van is really planning, because from everything they have seen, the three of them together still cannot defeat the beast. He suspects Van simply wants to use them as bait before escaping on his own. In his eyes, our protagonist is trying to sacrifice them to save himself. Van immediately rejects that idea. He has no interest in petty revenge. His true goal is to earn equality and respect for both his family and the Garuda people throughout the kingdom. To achieve that dream, he cannot abandon his comrades even if they once looked down on him. Hearing those words leaves the noble speechless. Watching the very person he despised risk his life to save everyone fills him with shame as he realizes how disgracefully he has treated Van before anyone can say another word. The hellboar charges in for round 3. Van orders everyone to attack again. As the beast rushes toward them, the Wind Noble activates Blade Dance before unleashing Black Dust, Sky Rend. The technique gathers countless rocks and debris into the wind before firing them like deadly projectiles. This time, the hellboar finally takes real damage. The continuous barrage creates the opening Van has been waiting for. He leaps onto the beast, grabs its head, and exploits another weakness. Unlike humans, four-legged beasts do not have shoulder blades connected directly to their spines. This gives them incredible flexibility in their front legs, but also leaves them vulnerable to sudden external force. Using Guki Combined Technique number 10, Van slams the massive creature straight into the ground. He immediately orders the magic swordsman to stab the exposed area near its chest, where the heart can be reached. The young swordsman hesitates for a split second as the beast stares directly at him, but he overcomes his fear and drives his blade forward with all his strength. Van and the Wind Noble celebrate as the sword pierces deep into the hellboar's body and strikes its heart. Victory seems certain, but just when it looks like the battle is over, the monster unleashes one final desperate ability, exploding upward and blasting everyone away. This technique is known as Curse Break, a rare spell possessed by only a handful of magical beasts. The hellboar unleashes a mana-infused roar that detonates everything within its range. The swordsman noble coughs up blood as the blast ruptures his internal organs. The hellboar regains the upper hand. Watching in horror, the injured boy quietly accepts what he believes is his inevitable death. Then Van suddenly steps forward and intercepts the monster's charge with nothing but his body, using a fusion technique called Lance Spiral. The technique redirects the impact into the ground, spiraling the force away from him. Frustrated, the hellboar pushes even harder, gradually overwhelming Van's ability to redirect the pressure. Driven into a corner, our protagonist wonders if he has no choice but to use his trump card. Although the technique could seriously damage his body, it may be their only chance to survive. Before doing anything, he orders the other boy to run, and the kid immediately escapes the battlefield. Now alone, Van struggles to hold back the hellboar's overwhelming strength. Eventually, the beast hurls him into a nearby tree with crushing force. The injured noble tries to rush over and help, but Van orders him to stay back. The hellboar wastes no time charging at the fallen Van, determined to finish him off. Everything points toward a hopeless ending. At that exact moment, the former assassin grew deadly serious as a menacing red aura radiated from his body. Suddenly, a long-range magic projectile crashes into the hellboar, knocking it sideways. Van instantly recognizes the spell and turns toward its caster. To his surprise, it is Prince Heinz. The prince has personally arrived to save them. The nobles quickly gather around Heinz and urge him to retreat, but he refuses. He declares that protecting the people is the duty of royalty. His speech greatly boosts the noble's morale, but Van knows every word is a lie. Heinz has always used noble speeches to inspire others before sending them to die. Confident that teamwork will be enough to defeat the monster, Heinz suggests fighting together. Van immediately shuts him down with a firm no. The prince is caught off guard and asks what he means. Van repeats himself without hesitation, refusing any help from Heinz. The surrounding nobles are outraged. They cannot believe Van would speak so disrespectfully to the very prince who just saved their lives. Van sees things differently. He argues that he would have already killed the Hellboar if Heinz had not interrupted. To everyone else, his words sound unbelievably arrogant. It is like a gamer blaming everyone else after losing a match. Ignoring everyone's reactions, Van walks toward the Hellboar alone. He even tells the prince to sit back and watch because he will finish the fight himself. It is funny how the Hellboar always seems to give them time to chat. The Wind Noble prepares to launch another attack, but Van orders him to stay back. Charging in recklessly now would only get them killed. Still, the Wind Noble believes he can take a hit, but our protagonist tells him to stop. Van tells everyone to stay ready and wait for his signal. Meanwhile, Heinz watches silently, both irritated and curious. The moment finally arrives. Van gives the signal to finish the monster. He charges first, confronting the Hellboar head-on. Unlike before, he keeps a clear head. Instead of relying on his dangerous trump card, he chooses to defeat the beast through strategy. The Hellboar lunges once more, but Van counters with a powerful rising strike. After failing to land 3 successful charges, the monster finally begins treating its opponents as genuine threats. It becomes much more cautious with every attack. Van notices the change immediately. Since the Hellboar is no longer charging recklessly, its attacks become easier to read and safely block. The beast roars and slashes with its massive tusks, but Van skillfully twists his body to evade every strike. The nobles, including Heinz, are stunned. Van displays incredible speed without using a single trace of magic. Heinz is even more shocked because our protagonist is not just fast. He is shifting his center of gravity to move without seemingly touching the ground. Heinz admits he has only ever witnessed this technique from high-ranking battle mages. The battle continues, and our protagonist overwhelms the Hellboar, circling it and landing repeated blows. Even so, his attacks still lack the power to bring the beast down. Without magical enhancement, Heinz thinks Van's punches feel like harmless taps against the monster. Now the Hellboar becomes enraged. Heinz realizes this is really bad. Van, however, has been waiting for exactly this. His goal is to frustrate the beast until it makes a fatal mistake. The Hellboar is about to unleash its devastating mana-infused roar once again. The instant Van sees it coming, he orders the Wind Mage to cast his spell. The noble immediately unleashes Rending Sky, forcing a violent torrent of wind straight into the monster's mouth. The compressed wind blocks the Hellboar's airway, causing its own roar to explode inside its mouth. The beast collapses. Van instantly capitalizes on the opportunity. He leaps directly in front of the monster, brings both hands together, and unleashes Doppelganger, a secret technique that creates twin shockwaves. The attack crushes the Hellboar's skull from both sides, sending the destructive force deep into its head. This time, the blow lands perfectly. The Hellboar finally collapses. As soon as the magic barrier disappears, Van shouts at the noble boy, telling him this is his chance to finish the beast. Without hesitation, the noble rushes forward and delivers the final blow. The Wind Mage stares in disbelief. He cannot believe they actually managed to defeat a Hellboar. Meanwhile, Van slowly rises to his feet and walks over to the exhausted noble. He offers him a hand and asks if he can still stand. For the first time, the noble forgets his prejudice. He accepts Van's hand and pulls himself up, complaining that the sonic blast nearly shattered his entire body. Van calmly explains that the roar was infused with mana, which disrupted his body and threw off his balance so severely. The former assassin advises him to cover his ears the next time he faces a Hellboar, explaining that it greatly reduces the impact of the beast's roar. The noble lets out a weak smile and says he will remember that advice, though he hopes he never has to fight another Hellboar again. With the monster finally defeated, Van turns his attention to the Heaven's Tear flowers they need to pass the exam. Unfortunately, only 2 blooms remain. He immediately recalls the examiner's warning that working in large groups would only complicate things. A wave of anxiety washes over him since there is no time left to search for more flowers. Before Van can think of a solution, the Wind Noble steps forward, picks up both flowers without hesitation, and walks over to Prince Heinz. He respectfully offers 1 flower to the prince, who accepts it with a calm smile and thanks him. Watching the exchange, Van cannot resist calling him out, pointing out that he just rewarded someone who spent the entire fight watching from the sidelines. He even jokes that it almost looks like a bribe. Him immediately fires back, insisting that serving the prince is simply the duty of a loyal retainer. Then, to Van's complete surprise, the kid offers him the 2nd flower. Our protagonist freezes for a moment, genuinely wondering if the boy made a mistake. In response, the Wind Noble calmly replies that it was intentional. He simply wants to repay the favor because he has no intention of owing anything. At the same time, he tells Van to stop calling him the Wind User since he actually has a proper name. He introduces himself as Falk, while the Sword Noble also steps forward and introduces introduces himself as Ralph. Van returns the gesture by giving his own name, and the three exchange a brief handshake. Van jokingly remarks that they probably will not meet again if Falk and Ralph fail the exam. Before anyone can leave, Prince Heinz stops them. He picks up several withered flowers lying nearby and channels his light magic into them. Within seconds, the faded petals bloom once again, restoring their vibrant colors. The two noble boys stare in amazement. They cannot hide their admiration, feeling honored to witness such elegant light magic from the prince. Van, however, cuts the moment short by reminding everyone that the sun is about to set and they need to return immediately. Falk instantly snaps back, telling Van to stop acting like he is giving orders, especially when the prince is standing right there. Just as they prepare to leave, Prince Heinz brings up something that caught his attention. He noticed that Van had been carefully covering his footprints with dirt. According to Heinz, erasing one's tracks like that is a technique commonly used by professional assassins. Combined with the martial arts Van displayed during the battle and his subtle habits, the prince concludes that Van is far from an ordinary country boy. Everything points to someone who has received professional assassin training. Hearing those words, Van feels tension rising inside him. He begins to wonder if he pushed things too far and accidentally exposed more of his past than he intended. Prince Heinz, however, has every reason to be suspicious. His father, the king, married numerous princesses from conquered nations to strengthen the kingdom, creating a complicated web of royal politics. Heinz's own mother is the fifth queen, a noblewoman born within the kingdom itself, giving him a unique position among the royal family. Because of that, both the other queens and his older siblings see him as a potential threat, fearing the king may choose him as the next heir to the throne. Living under constant political pressure, Heinz always expects assassins to come after him. After everything he has observed today, he begins to suspect that Van may have been sent to eliminate him. If that suspicion is true, it is not something he can afford to ignore. Meanwhile, sweat slowly runs down Van's face as he realizes that old habits truly never disappear. No matter how much time has passed since his regression, he still carries the instincts of the legendary assassin he once was. The problem is that he cannot admit the truth, and even if he did, nobody would believe him. Knowing that, Van decides his only option is to bluff his way out. Trying to maintain a calm expression, he casually claims that he never knew those techniques were considered assassin etiquette. Prince Heinz immediately sees through the weak excuse and clearly does not believe a single word. Even so, Van shrugs and tells him to believe whatever he wants because everything he said is supposedly the truth. As the atmosphere grows heavier, Van slowly walks toward the prince. Falk quickly steps in to block his path. In the next instant, Van disappears from sight and reappears directly in front of Heinz, casually placing a hand on the prince's shoulder. He laughs it off, saying he was only joking and asks Heinz to stop looking so serious. Van then explains that he simply is not used to speaking politely because he grew up as a country boy who was never taught proper manners. He gives a small respectful bow while carefully hiding the tension building inside him. Heinz, however, refuses to let the matter go. He once again questions Van about the mysterious footwork that looked almost like teleportation and directly asks whether he is an assassin. This time, Van comes up with a far more convincing lie. He claims he learned the technique from Helene Steinartz, the very young lady who recommended him for the academy. Van adds that Lady Helene advised him to conceal his techniques whenever possible, since martial arts are the only real weapon he possesses. Deep down, he feels slightly guilty for dragging her name into the lie without permission. Fortunately for him, the explanation finally eases Heinz's suspicion. Even Ralph looks visibly shaken the moment Helene's name is mentioned, making it clear that the Steinartz family commands respect, even among royalty. Hearing that name, the prince immediately remembers the woman known as the Ice Blossom Lady. He knows she is one of the Academy's most powerful figures. The only thing that surprises him is the thought that someone like her would be familiar with assassin techniques. Still, he quickly brushes the idea aside. He is certain the House of Steinartz would never be involved in something as dangerous as plotting the assassination of a prince. Ralph then asks Van why someone as important as Helene would recommend a dirt-born nobody like him. Van simply admits that he has no idea. All she told him was to attend the academy with her letter of recommendation. The prince shares his own theory, suggesting that Helene may have intended to train Van personally before eventually bringing him into her household. After witnessing Van's abilities with his own eyes, he admits he would have done the same thing Miss Helene did. With that, the prince finally lowers his guard and sincerely thanks Van. He admits that he could have lost his life if he had faced the beast alone, then gives a respectful bow to show his gratitude. Naturally, both Falk and Ralph are stunned seeing this. Our protagonist, however, remains as blunt as ever. He casually points out that they were never fighting for the prince's sake in the first place. Falk immediately scolds him for speaking so disrespectfully, but our protagonist could not care less after everything he has endured. The prince quietly notices that instead of asking for a reward, Van chooses to throw subtle jabs at him. Normally, this piques his curiosity about our protagonist, As the exam comes to an end, the students begin returning from the forest. Some proudly carry the flowers they gathered, while others limp back, bruised, exhausted, and empty-handed. A heavy sense of despair fills the air, as many wonder how they will face their families after failing to earn a place in such a prestigious academy. Meanwhile, the scheming supervisor grows increasingly anxious because the prince has yet to return. He had carefully made sure that only weaker magic beasts remained in the forest, creatures the prince could easily defeat. What worries him even more is the complete absence of the hell boar. Moments later, a group of 4 finally emerges from the forest. The man sighs in relief after seeing the prince alive and unharmed, but that relief instantly turns into rage the moment he spots Van. The examiner checks on our protagonist and asks if he is all right. On the other hand, the supervisor completely loses his composure and blurts out that Van should have been dead by now. Acting completely innocent, Van calmly asks whether the professor has a problem with him surviving. The professor realizes he almost exposed himself. He quickly regains his composure and awkwardly claims he was simply surprised to see Van return alive. Van casually replies that he did not come back alone. One by one, the other boys step out from behind him, struggling to drag something enormous across the ground. The professor nearly has a heart attack when he recognizes what it is. Even the examiner stares in disbelief before asking if that is really a magic beast. The students explain that they believe the creature was sent to assassinate the prince, so they brought back its head as proof. Both instructors fall completely silent, but for entirely different reasons. The examiner cannot understand how such a dangerous monster ended up inside the examination forest, while the professor is horrified that the hell boar failed to kill its target. Everyone suddenly turns toward the professor after catching another suspicious reaction from him. However, the man quickly brushed it off, noting how impressed he was that the students defeated such a beast. Fortunately for him, the prince immediately draws everyone's attention by openly praising the group. Seeing His Highness standing there completely unharmed only deepens the professor's shock. The examiner respectfully asks whether the prince personally participated in the battle. The prince calmly answers that he merely watched from the sidelines. At that moment, the professor realizes he is cornered. If anyone discovers that he deliberately released a magic beast to assassinate the prince, his career, and possibly his life will be over. His Highness then innocently asks why the professor looks so unusually pale. Thinking quickly, the professor changes tactics and begins praising the prince for supposedly slaying such a powerful beast. His actions are so suspicious that even Van and Falk notice. However, the prince gently corrects him, reminding the absent-minded professor that he did nothing of the sort. The real heroes were everyone else. More importantly, Van is the one who single-handedly ensured their survival. Both instructors are left speechless. No one can believe that a Garuda could be the strongest among the group. Ralph immediately supports the prince's statement, explaining that Van possesses an unbelievable amount of magical knowledge for a Garuda. Meanwhile, Falk shyly confirms that every word of the prince's praise is true. The professor stands there in stunned silence, unable to accept that a Garuda has become the center of attention. Then the prince delivers the final blow by calmly pointing out that it only makes sense for someone personally chosen by the House of Steinhertz. Although Van barely learned anything from Helene, he decides not to correct the misunderstanding. Before long, rumors spread throughout the crowd about the incredible Garuda chosen by the Ice Blossom Lady. The examiner sincerely thanks Van, explaining that protecting the prince is considered one of the greatest services anyone can perform for the kingdom. Still as blunt as ever, Van immediately corrects him, saying he never protected the prince. Saving him was simply a byproduct of defeating the magic beast. With that settled, he shifts everyone's attention back to what truly matters. One by one, the boys present their blue flowers. The examiner then looks toward the professor, waiting for the official results. As much as it pains him, the professor has no choice but to announce the names of those who passed. He reluctantly calls out the 3 boys, including Van. With that, our protagonist officially earns his place in the academy. With everything finally settled, the prince orders the examiner to carry out a thorough investigation into how the magic beast appeared. The scene then shifts to the academy's welcoming ceremony. The headmaster addresses the new students, making it clear that the academy is not meant for those who simply excel at magic. Its true purpose is to mold talented youths into honorable warriors who will protect and serve the kingdom. Surrounded by gifted mages, Van quietly reflects on how much his life has changed. In his previous life, he could never have imagined setting foot inside the academy, let alone becoming one of its students. Watching from above, Helene silently observes the young prodigy, believing he has the potential to break the deep-rooted prejudice against the Galda people. Later, Helene walks through a grand hallway leading to an intricately decorated chamber. Inside sits a round table with 5 seats, with only one left vacant. The other 4 members glare at her, clearly annoyed by her late arrival. The thousand-sword princess Karina Ryutiel immediately criticizes Helene for showing up with such a satisfied smile after making everyone wait. Amelia Rodewald, remaining calm as always, simply asks why this unexpected meeting was called. The Quiet Fist, Arnold Clavis, states that there is only one matter to discuss tonight. 8th Prince, Leonis Ferrania, then makes it perfectly clear. They are gathered to decide how to deal with the imposter among them. Confused, Helene asks what exactly he means. Arnold explains that the admission of the first Galda student in the Academy's history has caused an uproar among the nobles. Karina scoffs at the decision, sarcastically remarking that they might as well start admitting monsters next. However, the one most outraged by Van's enrollment is Leonis. He turns toward Helene, the final member of the 5 Radiant Crowns, and demands an explanation for recommending a filthy Garuda to such a prestigious academy. The academy is home to nobles and elite mages from across the kingdom. Even among such talented students, pride often leads to fights and conflicts. To keep order, 5 exceptional students known as the 5 Radiant Crowns are granted authority to enforce discipline. Leonis questions how someone of Helene's standing could make such a foolish decision. Without the slightest hesitation, Helene replies that she witnessed Van's strength with her own eyes and personally acknowledged his talent. Karina struggles to accept the words strong and Garuda in the same sentence. She insists that a race cursed from birth can never be anything but weak and useless in battle. Even the usually composed Amelia agrees that the idea makes no sense. A race incapable of using magic should never be able to compete in combat. Leonis smugly remarks that Helene seems to lack even the most basic common sense. That comment immediately irritates her. She fires back that common sense is often nothing more than an excuse to stop people from thinking and force blind beliefs onto others. Leonis grows visibly angry, unable to tolerate having his authority challenged. Before the argument can escalate further, Arnold calmly proposes a simple solution. They can test Van and see whether he truly possesses the strength Helene claims. Leonis immediately likes the idea and even suggests questioning Helene's insights if Van fails. Though clueless about his plan, she politely warns everyone not to underestimate her choice if they want to avoid embarrassment. Her confidence only annoys Karina even more. She volunteers to personally test Van's abilities, and Leonis gladly approves, hoping she will crush the outsider. As Karina walks past Helene, she mockingly asks whether the Garuda boy has become her favorite. She declares that she intends to destroy Helene's prized toy along with her arrogant pride. A week passes after classes begin, and Van walks through the academy hallway alone. Apart from the occasional hostile glare and whispers behind his back, things have been surprisingly peaceful. He recalls the previous lesson, where the instructor deliberately asked him an advanced question on magic theory to embarrass him. The rest of the class remained silent, because the topic was far beyond their level. The careless instructor then mocked Van, saying it was foolish to expect a Garuda to answer such a difficult question, since his people were hardly known for reading books. Instead, Van completely humbled him. He effortlessly explained the subject, took over the lesson, and practically turned the old professor's lecture into his own. Since that embarrassing defeat, no one has tried pulling the same stunt again. His thoughts are interrupted when Ralph suddenly slaps him on the back and invites him to lunch. Van thanks him for always supporting him, but Ralph looks completely confused, having no idea what he is talking about. The two then head toward the cafeteria together. On the way, a purple-haired girl suddenly calls out to Van. She looks genuinely offended, as though he has committed an unforgivable crime by walking past without greeting her. Both Van and Ralph politely apologize, but Van's eyes widen when she suddenly raises her blade to his neck. Completely unfazed, he bluntly asks what her problem is. The girl looks down on him with a smug expression and declares that it is only natural for a Garuda to kneel with his forehead pressed against the ground. Van calmly replies that they are both students of the same academy and that he has no intention of bowing, simply because she demands it. Hearing this, she coldly questions whether he even understands his place within the academy. Ralph immediately steps in to defend his friend, telling her she has gone too far. She insists that strict discipline is necessary to ensure everyone remains obedient to those above them. Van simply nods and admits that seniors do deserve respect. Even so, he refuses to respect someone who tries to force it at sword point. He grabs the girl's blade so firmly that she cannot pull it back or push it forward. With a sudden twist, he throws her off balance and sends her into a panic. She desperately pours more strength into her sword, but that is exactly what he is waiting for. In one clean motion, he strikes with the sever edge technique and snaps the blade in half. The moment she recognizes the technique, the arrogant girl breaks into a cold sweat. Bringing a cheap zinc alloy sword against someone like him was a rookie mistake. Zinc blades are common among beginners because they conduct mana well, but they are far too fragile for real combat. She bitterly complains that students are forbidden from carrying proper swords on campus. Only the 5 Radiant Crowns are granted that privilege. Hearing that title for the first time, Van grows curious. Almost as if summoned by the conversation, the Sword Princess herself arrives. She immediately accuses him of disrespecting a senior and destroying another student's property. The purple-haired girl quickly bows her head and addresses her as Lady Karina. The name alone sends a shock through Van's mind. In his previous life, there was hardly anyone who had not heard of Karina the Bloodblade. His thoughts freeze for a moment as he wonders why the Angel of Death herself is standing inside the academy. Before his regression, the kingdom had been consumed by countless uprisings. Among the most feared groups was the Ruthless White Annihilation Ring, and the name he remembered most from that organization was Lady Karina. She was known as the Blood Edge, a terrifying warrior responsible for slaughtering countless heroes, Destroying the White Annihilation Ring had cost the kingdom an unimaginable number of lives. That bloodshed eventually gave way to an even greater tragedy, the brutal War of Succession. Van had crossed paths with Karina only once on the battlefield, but that single encounter had burned her image into his memory forever. That is why he cannot understand why one of the kingdom's future greatest enemies is standing inside its most prestigious academy. While Van remains lost in thought, Karina catches him staring and adds another offense to his list. She coldly remarks that it is rude to openly gawk at an upperclassman. Van apologizes but cannot resist adding that he has never considered her someone above him. The noble kid desperately tries to stop him from provoking her further, repeatedly warning him about who she really is. He explains that she is one of the 5 Radiants. When Van still looks confused, Ralph explains that the 5 Radiants are the Academy's 5 strongest elites, students whose abilities stand on an entirely different level. He also reveals that Karina entered the academy at only 13 years old, a feat worthy of a true prodigy. Putting the pieces together, Van realizes that Karina must have originally been born into one of the kingdom's high noble families. The fact that he never learned this in his previous life means her identity must have been erased after she became a rebel. He never imagined meeting her at this point in her life. Then an even darker thought crosses his mind. What if this is the perfect opportunity to eliminate her before history repeats itself? If he kills her now, the future rebellion could disappear before it even begins. Without that rebellion, the War of Succession might never happen, and Heinz may never rise to the throne. As Van sinks deeper into his thoughts, Karina notices him zoning out again. She warns him that she is one of the few students officially permitted to carry a real sword. Taking a flawless stance, she radiates killing intent so refined that her strike seems capable of ending a life before anyone even notices her move. Ralph urgently begs Van to apologize before he throws his life away. Instead, Van calmly says he wants to confirm something first and asks Ralph to step back. He raises his own stance, openly inviting her to attack, already pushed beyond her patience. The thousand-blade sword princess launches forward with the intent to kill. Her slash moves so fast that ordinary eyes cannot even follow it, yet Van narrowly slips past the attack, suffering nothing more than a shallow graze instead of a fatal wound. Karina immediately announces that the punishment is postponed and claims she will deal with him another time before walking away with the purple-haired girl. Once they reach a secluded area, the purple-haired girl asks why she spared him. Karina struggles to maintain her composure before lowering herself to the ground. She quietly admits that she did not let him go. She orders the girl to keep today's events a secret before revealing the injury Van inflicted during their brief exchange. She recalls reading about it in an ancient martial arts manual. The technique targets a vital nerve point known as the hardcore point, leaving the victim temporarily paralyzed and unable to walk properly. The purple-haired girl asks if that means the fight ended in a draw. Karina remains silent. Deep down, she knows that was far from the truth. She had aimed directly for Van's neck, intending to end the fight instantly. Somehow, he slipped inside her range and mercilessly struck one of her vital points. She instinctively retreated to avoid the attack, but that split-second reaction caused her own strike to miss. Van then followed up with flawless precision, landing the blow exactly where he intended. What unsettles Karina the most is that this technique is taught only in the most prestigious sword schools. She cannot understand where someone like Van could have learned it. Meanwhile, the purple-haired girl, who obviously has 2 brain cells fighting for a 3rd place, thinks Karina won because she is still standing. Karina quietly agrees on the surface, but deep inside she knows the truth. The nerve point Van struck was never meant to kill. It only inflicted unbearable pain. He deliberately chose a non-lethal target. If that had been a real battle to the death, she is certain she would have been sent on an economy-class flight straight to the afterlife. Brushing those thoughts aside, she gets to her feet and admits she was careless. Next time, however, she vows to bring a sword capable of breaking that Garuda once and for all. Back with our protagonist, Ralph asks what he was trying to confirm earlier. Van brushes him off, but Ralph keeps pressing for an answer. Our guy falls into deep thought, realizing that despite her hostility, the sword princess held back considerably and never even used her special magic ability. Even though she called it a punishment, she never truly tried to hurt him. Van suddenly says that Karina is actually a nice girl, catching Ralph completely off guard. At that moment, he becomes certain that she is not the Bloodblade, at least not yet. Determined to change her future, he silently makes up his mind. Ralph eventually drops the subject, joking that our boy must have hit his head too hard. The following day, when Van returns to the classroom, everyone immediately falls silent and avoids looking at him. He quietly takes his seat, and the entire class instantly begins gossiping about what happened in the hallway. Our boy forces a nervous smile, but then his 2 friends arrive to reassure him that trash opinions will always stink. Ralph offers to accompany him to apologize to the Sword Princess, while Falk promises to have his father smooth things over. Van tells the 2 kind-hearted guys to stop sticking their noses into other people's business. He teases them for changing so much since they first met, but sincerely appreciates their concern. Even so, he intends to settle this matter with his own hands. His answer leaves the 2 guys stunned, and they ask what exactly he means. Van tells himself that if he wants to prevent the Bloodblade from ever coming into existence, he has to face her right here and now. He then cracks a cold joke, saying the five Radiants are nothing more than students responsible for maintaining school discipline, so they are not all that special. Falk and Ralph are left completely flabbergasted and ask if he truly understands what he is saying. Just then, everyone's attention shifts to Helene as she walks into the classroom and loudly calls out his name. Meanwhile, the entire classroom falls silent. Leaning back in his chair, Van casually asks what is happening. Helene politely asks him to accompany her for a while, assuring him it will not take long since she has another class soon. Van studies her quietly, knowing this is not a request he can refuse. The moment they leave together, the entire class is left speechless. No one has ever spoken to the Ice Blossom Lady so casually. The scene shifts to a tea table in the middle of a beautiful flower garden, the perfect place for a private conversation. Helene smiles gently as she reveals that the five Radiants sent Karina to test his abilities. Van sarcastically remarks that the warning comes a little too late. Helene lets out a soft laugh and admits she never expected Karina to challenge him so quickly. Karina is the future head of the renowned Luthier family, so her extraordinary swordsmanship does not surprise Van. However, he can tell she is far more than a gifted prodigy. There is something much deeper about her. Helene tilts her head and asks what he means. Struggling to put it into words, Van says Karina feels like someone who has abandoned everything in life except the sword. Helene's expression softens before she quietly praises his sharp instincts. She explains that Karina is not just another noble daughter of the Luthier family. She is the child born from her father's affair with a maid and was never officially recognized as legitimate. Everything changes when she turns 10. During a friendly sparring match, she completely overwhelms her 17-year-old brother. Until that day, everyone believes he will inherit the family name. But her overwhelming talent forces the entire family to rethink its future. Despite enduring years of resentment and jealousy, Karina is eventually chosen as the next head of the family regardless of her birth. After hearing all this, Van wonders how Helene knows such personal details despite being an outsider. Helene laughs softly and explains that noble society runs on gossip. Setting that aside, she recalls the first time she saw Karina before the academy entrance ceremony at a formal gathering. The young girl stood alone in a quiet corner while no one even bothered to greet her. She watched silently as her own father ignored her existence and spoke with everyone else as though she were invisible. The emptiness in her lifeless eyes reflected the complete absence of his affection. Seeing how much Helene cares about the girl, Van asks why she never approached her that night. Helene explains that it was never that simple. As the heir of another powerful noble house, stepping in would have been viewed as interference in the internal affairs of the Luthier family. Van lets out a sigh, thoroughly annoyed by how exhausting noble traditions can be. Helene continues, saying Karina probably does not even remember that night. With the way her family's politics are unfolding, she fears the girl will eventually stray down the wrong path. Van's expression turns serious as he asks what she would do if that day ever comes. Without the slightest hesitation, Helene says she would use every ounce of her strength to stop Karina. Otherwise, she would never free herself from the regret that still weighs heavily on her heart. At that moment, everything finally clicks for Van. He has always believed Helene has the potential to become a legendary hero whose name would echo throughout history. Yet in his previous life, he never once hears of her. She most likely dies trying to save Karina after the girl loses herself. As though reading his thoughts, Helene warns him not to grow sentimental toward her. She is still a ruthless swordswoman who would not hesitate to cut him down. Van confidently replies that he understands perfectly, and this conversation only strengthens his resolve. Looking straight into her eyes, he vows to erase her regrets. In his previous life, Karina becomes an unstoppable force. This time, however, he has the chance to stop that tragedy before it is ever born. Surprised by his determination, Helene quietly admits that his words bring her a sense of relief. She says she hopes he will help her. Still, words alone are meaningless. She asks whether he truly knows a way to counter her invincible sword mastery. Van assures her that he does and casually invites her to meet him after school so he can demonstrate it. Later that evening, Ralph and Falk head into the forest in search of him. Falk feels uneasy about following their friend like this, while Ralph grows seriously suspicious about where Van keeps disappearing without saying a word. After all, anyone would get curious after seeing him sneak into the forest alone with the Ice Princess. Falk tries to brush it off and change the subject. That is when they spot Van standing calmly in the middle of a raging blizzard. In front of him, Helene shows no mercy. Countless icicles and razor-sharp ice lances rain down on him without pause. The moment Van hears their panicked voices, he turns around. The ruthless Ice Princess does not believe in timeouts. The instant he takes his eyes off his opponent, she punishes him by unleashing the 1,000 thorns of the ice garden. Massive vines of solid ice burst from the ground and surge toward all three of them. Ralph and Falk instantly regret every decision that brought them there. At that moment, Van delivers a single perfectly focused slash, shattering the entire attack in one clean strike. He spins around with a cheeky grin and tells them their timing could not have been better. He even invites them to join Helene's side and attack him together, claiming he is struggling to find anyone who can give him a real challenge. Meanwhile, Leonis approaches Karina and greets her. Since she is clearly in no mood for small talk, she immediately asks if His Highness needs something. Leonis answers that he is not trying to pressure her, but he cannot help wondering what weapon or strategy she intends to use against the Garuda in the upcoming duel. Karina gives a slight bow and informs him that everything is almost ready, because the item she requested from her family has finally arrived. The moment he hears that, a mischievous smile creeps across Leonis's face. Just then, Anastasia enters the room, struggling under the weight of an enormous coffin. She asks Karina where it should be placed. Karina calmly tells her to carry it to her room and make sure it is handled with extreme care. Leonis stares at it in amazement. Even from a distance, he can tell that the object radiates the presence of a legendary artifact. Karina then asks whether using something like this against a mere Garuda is excessive. Leonis, however, has no interest in a quiet execution. He wants the duel to become an unforgettable spectacle. He tells Karina that she is a living blade whose talent deserves to be witnessed by everyone. Someone of her caliber should seize this chance to display the strength worthy of one of the 5 brilliant crowns. Soon afterward, an official announcement appears on the Academy's notice board. News spreads through the campus like wildfire. The notice declares that Karina, one of the 5 brilliant crowns, has formally challenged the first-year student Van to a duel as punishment for disturbing public order. Everyone understands that this is far more than an ordinary duel. Behind closed doors, many students whisper that it is nothing more than a carefully disguised execution. The battle is scheduled to take place at the Royal Academy's great training grounds, better known as the Chalk Ring Arena. More than a simple training field, it is a sacred battleground reserved for official duels and prestigious trials where the Academy's finest warriors prove themselves. Because of its history, the arena commands tremendous respect. When the long-awaited day finally arrives, a heavy sense of tension hangs over the Academy. Standing calmly at the center of the arena, Van loosens his muscles as he waits for the match to begin. With every passing minute, more spectators flood into the stands. Everyone wants to witness what many believe will become one of the Academy's most memorable battles. Ralph comments that the atmosphere feels strangely oppressive. Falk replies that the reason is obvious. Nobody truly believes they are about to watch a fair duel. Confused, Ralph asks what he means. Helene calmly explains that this is not a contest between equals. It is punishment disguised as a duel. One of the 5 brilliant crowns is facing a Garuda, and nearly everyone expects nothing less than a one-sided massacre. Ralph admits that may be what everyone else believes. Falk finishes his thought by reminding him that they already know how terrifying Van truly is. Our protagonist is simply built different. Helene then glances toward the royal viewing platform and quietly points out that even the prince appears to share that opinion. Sure enough, Prince Heinz is seated among the honored guests, silently observing the arena below. Leonis notices his brother from afar and wonders why he would attend this particular duel, but no answer comes to mind. Moments later, the massive arena gates swing open, and Karina enters while carrying the enormous coffin with both hands. Ralph immediately looks both alarmed and puzzled. Helene quietly remarks that Karina has brought out one of her greatest trump cards. Even Van cannot hide his surprise when he sees the massive coffin before him. With a nervous chuckle, he jokes that perhaps she has already prepared his coffin, though he quickly adds that assuming victory so early seems rather arrogant. Karina coldly tells him to stop joking, because that coffin will indeed become the cause of his death. She slowly opens it, revealing countless swords neatly arranged inside, along with several magical storage realms built into its structure. It is the legendary sword coffin, a portable armory passed down through generations of the sword saints of House Ludi. Falk can only stare in disbelief, wondering why the sword saints would ever create such an absurd weapon. Ignoring everyone's reactions, Karina draws a blade and levels it directly at Van before declaring that he will regret ever setting foot inside the academy. Van's playful smile fades. His gaze turns razor-sharp as he calmly promises that she will be the one regretting today's battle after he destroys her treasured sword coffin before thousands of spectators. He then asks when the duel officially begins. Karina smiles confidently. It already has. Without another word, both fighters explode forward. Karina never anticipates Van's unbelievable speed. One instant he stands several meters away, and the next he is already in front of her. She barely raises her sword in time to block his attack. Van compliments her quick reflexes, but Karina is left speechless. So is everyone else. None of the spectators can comprehend how a Garuda is capable of moving that fast. Whispers immediately spread throughout the arena. Watching carefully, Falk admits that every time Van uses that technique, it looks exactly like teleportation magic. Helene quietly shakes her head. It is not magic. It is a movement technique known as phantom step. She explains that ordinary movement starts by pushing off the ground before the rest of the body follows. Van's method is completely different. Instead of relying on leg strength alone, he shifts his center of gravity while rotating his pelvis, allowing his entire body to surge forward in one perfectly coordinated motion. The result makes him appear to glide effortlessly, as though invisible springs are launching him across the battlefield. Even after hearing the explanation, Ralph and Falk still struggle to understand it. In actual combat, Phantom Step is so fast that it is almost impossible to distinguish from teleportation. Helene admits she made the exact same mistake when she first witnessed it in the Garuda Forest. Realizing the advantage, Falk becomes excited. As long as Van stays within close range, Karina's longsword should become much harder to use effectively. However, the momentum suddenly changes. Karina launches a relentless series of attacks that gradually forces Van onto the defensive. One precise strike slips past his guard, leaving a shallow cut across his arm. She has already figured out his strategy. Van intends to remain close enough to deny her the full reach of her blade. What he fails to account for is the ricasso, the unsharpened section near the sword's hilt. By gripping that area through the technique known as half-swording, an experienced swordsman can maintain complete control even during close-quarters combat. Ralph remembers hearing stories of the technique being used on real battlefields, but never imagined a noble lady would master it so perfectly. Falk finally realizes that the rumors calling Karina the next sword saint are fully deserved. Helene continues observing with narrowed eyes. Even so, she believes relying on that technique against someone like Van is still an incredibly dangerous gamble. Van closes the gap once more. He instantly responds with a powerful punch that lands squarely against her body, forcing her back several steps. Refusing to let her recover, he immediately presses the attack. Watching from the stands, Leonis frowns in irritation, convinced Karina is carelessly allowing herself to be struck. Anastasia quietly explains that magic swordsmen depend heavily on sensing mana. Since Van's attacks contain absolutely no magical energy, they become incredibly difficult for them to detect in advance. Karina, however, remains completely unfazed, protected by a powerful magical barrier surrounding her body. She believes no ordinary physical attack can ever break through it unless Van somehow uses magic. Then, without warning, everything changes. A deafening ringing explodes inside her ears, making it feel as though her eardrums have burst apart. An overwhelming wave of dizziness washes over her, throwing her balance into complete disarray. Startled, she demands to know what he just did. Van simply grins and sarcastically suggests that perhaps her magical concentration is lacking because of where she comes from. His mocking remark only fuels her anger. He casually explains that the technique is called air palm. By releasing compressed air pressure through a palm strike, he creates a concentrated shockwave that travels into the semicircular canals of the inner ear, disrupting the body's sense of balance. As those sounds echo throughout the arena, the spectators fall into stunned silence. Lady Karina, the proud sword princess, is actually being forced backward. Leonis clenches his fists in frustration. To him, it looks as though a noble is being humiliated before the entire academy, still enduring the painful ringing inside her ears. Karina hears Van calmly ask whether they should simply end the duel here. The instant the words leave his mouth, he dashes forward again, intending to finish the battle. But Karina slowly raises her head. A sinister smile spreads across her lips. In that moment, everyone realizes they have completely misunderstood her retreat. She was never being overwhelmed. She had been setting a trap all along without hesitation. Karina drives her sword deep into the arena floor. An explosive surge of magical power erupts across the battlefield as violent shockwaves rip through the ground, tearing apart the stone beneath their feet and hurling shattered debris and towering clouds of dust into the air. The spectators glance around in panic as Van steadies himself and carefully observes the incoming attack. From his perspective, Karina does nothing more than swing her sword while channeling mana through the blade. Yet, even without landing a direct hit, the shockwave alone rattles his entire body. Karina explains that this overwhelming power is exactly why generations of sword saints dedicate their lives to mastering the Heavenfall blade. At the same time, Van notices its greatest weakness. The sword itself struggles to withstand the immense force flowing through it, as though it might break under its own power. Watching from the sidelines, Leonis finally smiles. He realizes Karina has been holding back this entire time. Now that she has revealed her true strength, he is convinced the duel is over. Van, however, shows no sign of fear. Instead, he calmly remarks that she should take better care of her sword. Karina replies that she normally would, but she plans to end this foolish duel with her very next swing. Mana surges into the blade once more, causing everyone watching to tense up. The spectators begin to fear that she truly intends to kill him. Ralph and Falk quietly ask each other what is happening, but Helene steps in and explains. Van's attacks have been landing consistently, yet none of them carry enough force to defeat Karina in a single blow. Karina, meanwhile, possesses the Heavenfall blade, a technique capable of erasing him with one strike. She has been allowing his attacks to connect because she wants to make an example out of him. If she releases the Heavenfall blade the moment Van closes the distance, even if he avoids the blade itself, the devastating shockwave at point-blank range will still be enough to kill him. Hearing this, Ralph and Falk fall silent, wondering how Van plans to survive. Back on the battlefield, Karina raises her sword again, and orders him to accept the treatment befitting someone of his status. She even claims she might spare his life if he does. Van grins and casually points out that she seems unusually obsessed with social status. Karina answers that such thinking reflects the natural order of the world. To her, the strength of one's mana determines the value of a bloodline, and that belief forms the very foundation of the kingdom. Van simply smirks. He says that sounds exactly like something a noble would say before teasing her once again. He asks whether pretending to be a noble actually makes her one. His words confuse Karina at first, but they quickly ignite her anger. Van presses further, revealing that noble blood and commoner blood both flow through her veins. According to him, she tries so desperately to prove herself because she longs for her father to finally acknowledge her as a true noble. Those words strike the deepest part of her heart. Karina freezes, unable to comprehend how he uncovered such a closely guarded secret. Fury overwhelms her, and she pours even more mana into the Heavenfall blade. The spectators grow increasingly worried as the pressure continues to rise. Helene instantly realizes what Van is doing. He is deliberately provoking Karina, pushing her into unleashing an all-out attack without thinking. Ralph cannot understand such reckless logic. He wonders why Van would risk his own life just to force that reaction. Yet Van's accusation is completely accurate. Karina has spent her entire life hiding the shame of her birth. Although she is the daughter of a nobleman, she was born to his concubine, leaving her trapped between two worlds. That silent pressure follows her everywhere. Because of those feelings, she briefly sympathizes with Van when she first sees him walking proudly through the academy despite being a Garuda. For a moment she senses a strange connection between them. That is why she volunteers to test him herself, believing she can settle the matter without taking his life. Instead, Van repays that small act of mercy by exposing her deepest insecurity. Convinced that he deserves no forgiveness, Karina declares that she will kill him. The instant she swings her sword, Van dashes straight toward her. Karina unleashes the full power of the Heavenfall blade, bringing it crashing down with everything she has. When the dust finally settles, the entire arena falls silent. Van is kneeing slightly, with both bare hands gripping the massive blade, stopping the attack completely. The crowd stares in utter disbelief. He has disarmed the Heavenfall blade with nothing but his hands. Everyone believes such a feat should be impossible. No one should ever be capable of catching a descending sword barehanded during real combat. Yet Van creates an entirely new technique before their eyes. First, he perfectly matches the speed of his hand with the falling blade. The moment they make contact, he begins stripping away its momentum. Just before the swing reaches its full power, he disperses and absorbs the force by bending his knees and sinking toward the ground, sending cracks racing across the arena floor. The technique is called Still Glyph, the Zero-style grasp. It is the very same method he previously used to drive Helene's ice spears into the ground deep within the forest. With a playful smile, Van admits that the Heavenfall blade is indeed an incredible technique. He simply knows how to kill the force behind it. Karina can only stare in disbelief before shouting that such a thing should be impossible. In that brief instant, Karina's emotions overwhelm her, leaving a small opening in her defense. Van immediately takes advantage of it and drives a powerful strike into her chest. The impact launches her backward until she slams into the sword coffin behind her. As she falls, she lands on her knees in the exact same spot where she once stood in the arena. She stares ahead in disbelief, unable to accept what has just happened. Silence sweeps across the arena as every spectator watches the legendary Thousand-Blade Sword Princess kneeling before her opponent. Some even begin questioning whether this is the true strength of the Garuda race. Leonise and Anastasia grit their teeth in frustration, while Ralph and Falk secretly celebrate and hope Van presses the attack without giving her a chance to recover. Van has other plans. He calmly waits, allowing Karina to regain her composure. Once she steadies herself, she asks why he refuses to finish the fight. Slowly rising to her feet, she bitterly questions whether he is showing her mercy, insisting she has no need for pity. Van immediately rejects the idea. Mercy has nothing to do with it. He simply has no interest in defeating a noble swordswoman who is still holding back. What he truly wants is to see her fight with everything she has. He challenges her to reveal her true self. His words sting her pride like another insult. Without another word, Karina unlocks the full power hidden inside the sword coffin. She reaches in and draws one of the kingdom's most famous weapons, the Star Ring Sword. Forged from an incredibly thin and flexible metal, the spring sword bends and twists in impossible ways. Van instantly recognizes it. In his previous life, the same weapon was feared as the Massacre Sword, Bloodchain Perlet. Meeting his gaze with burning determination, Karina declares that she will show him the countless sacrifices she made to stand where she is today. This is exactly what Van has been waiting for. She warns him that if he truly wants to witness her full strength, then he must accept whatever follows. If he fails to survive, the blame will rest entirely on him. The sword coffin erupts with overwhelming power. A violent tornado of blades bursts into existence, swirling around Karina with terrifying force. Ralph and Falk stare in complete shock, unable to understand what they are witnessing. They wonder if it is simply another sword technique, but Helene quickly corrects them. This is Requiem, a national magic arts technique mastered by only a handful of members of the Luthier family. By using magic, it greatly enhances the sword's flexibility while accelerating its tip to supersonic speed. Van quietly studies the raging storm before him. The spinning blades resemble countless spears dancing endlessly through the air. Karina names the technique the dance of circle spears. She declares that nothing can survive within its domain. Flames, lightning, and flesh are all shredded alike once the blades begin their deadly dance. Soon the attack will spread across the entire arena. If Van fears for his life, he can surrender and leave now. She is generous enough to offer him that chance. Otherwise, not even his bones will remain. Van listens without the slightest trace of fear. He calmly replies that there is no need for her to expand the attack because he intends to come to her instead. Closing his eyes for a brief moment, he focuses completely. When he opens them again, he notices something he had missed before. Although the tornado moves at incredible speed, it is not invisible. Faint trails shimmer through the air, revealing the paths of every blade. At that instant, he activates tachypsychia. It is a rare phenomenon that dramatically accelerates the brain's processing speed during moments of extreme danger. This instinctive survival mechanism allows a person to filter overwhelming information and identify the safest possible path. Most people experience it only by chance. Van, however, has mastered the ability to activate it whenever he chooses. With his senses sharpened to their limit, he steps directly into the storm. Just as he expected, the blades fail to tear him apart. Instead, he weaves through the deadly whirlwind with flawless precision. Leonis watches in disbelief as Van effortlessly deflects the relentless attacks. Even the prince can no longer hide his confusion and fascination. Van has already figured out the secret behind the weapon. A spring sword always keeps its center of gravity at its tip. Every movement and every attack depends on that single point. If he strikes the tip itself, the entire technique will collapse. Karina stares at him in disbelief before admitting that he truly is a monster. Van calmly shakes his head. It has nothing to do with being a monster. He simply works harder than most people, just as she does. His answer only confuses her further. As he continues speaking, her frustration grows. He explains that the spring sword chooses its own master. Anyone lacking complete control would eventually slash their own body with it. Simply being born into a family of legendary swordsmen is never enough to wield such a weapon. Then he loudly asks how many years she has devoted to mastering that single blade. The question catches Karina completely off guard. For the first time, she truly thinks about it. Her thoughts drift back to childhood when her father once taught her how to hold a sword. To him, it may have been nothing more than a passing moment, but to her it became an unforgettable memory. For a brief instant, she believed she had finally felt her father's love. That moment never came again. As the years passed, her father became consumed by affairs of state. A daughter born to a concubine received little attention when he already had a legitimate family to protect. Determined to earn his acknowledgement, Karina devoted herself entirely to the sword. She believed that if she surpassed everyone else, her father would finally recognize her as part of the family. Day after day, year after year, relentless practice transformed her into an overwhelming swordswoman. Eventually, she defeated her half-brother before countless witnesses. The whispers of doubt disappeared, but they were replaced by fear and resentment. Even her father began looking at her with unease. The small amount of affection he once showed completely vanished. Although he officially acknowledged her as his daughter and recognized her as a legitimate heir despite her birth, the truth became too difficult for him to bear. To protect his household, he eventually chose to distance himself from her. That was the day Karina realized the only thing she truly possessed was her sword. From then on, she dedicated her entire existence to becoming stronger. She swore to gain such overwhelming power that no one would ever abandon her again. In her heart, that was the only path that could earn the recognition of both her father and House Luthier. Back in the arena, Karina angrily demands to know what Van could possibly understand about her pain. Driven by emotion, she charges at him once more. The swirling blades finally manage to leave several shallow cuts across Van's body, but he immediately notices something else. Her attacks have become slower, and small openings are beginning to appear. Instead of backing away, Van advances once again. Karina cannot understand his decision. Everyone else has always fled from the reach of her sword, yet this man continues walking straight toward her. What she finds impossible to comprehend is why someone with no magic refuses to take a single step backward. Meanwhile, Van thinks to himself that he isn't doing this just to stop her future rebellion. He knows from experience what it feels like to devote everything to honing a single strength, only to discover in the end that it bears worthless fruit. In other words, Van understands her pain better than anyone. He tells Karina that he sees someone crying inside the storm, and he cannot simply walk away. Karina angrily replies that she isn't crying. Van clarifies that he wasn't talking about her, but her sword. He asks if this isn't enough, catching her completely off guard. Growing even more furious, she declares that this is all she has. She adds that she will do anything to become the strongest, and finally make the Luthier family acknowledge her. As she says this, she unleashes a flurry of strikes. Our protagonist blocks and endures every blow while pointing out how wrong she is. He explains that no one else has the right to determine her self-worth. He tells her that he understands everything she has gone through, and even if no one else acknowledges her, to him, Karina is the greatest swordswoman he has ever seen. Those words catch her completely off guard. She suddenly remembers her very first sword training session with her father. Her father had told her that even when cutting down her enemies, she should never carry anger or hatred in her heart. He smiles gently before adding that she should always fight with pride and carry herself as a true noble. Back in the present, Van finally manages to make her stop attacking. Tears well up in her eyes as she realizes the important lesson she lost and how she abandoned herself while chasing acknowledgement. Because of that, she lets her sword fall. She walks back to retrieve another blade while thanking our protagonist. This time, she draws the sword she truly wants to wield. Instead of another prolonged exchange, she declares that she will pour everything into a single strike, hoping Van can withstand it. Our protagonist confidently smiles, showing that he is ready whenever she is. Meanwhile, the crowd holds its breath, knowing this attack will decide the battle. Both of them move at the same time. Karina delivers an overhead slash, the very technique she has perfected since childhood and the move her father taught her. Meanwhile, our protagonist smirks, realizing that he is finally facing the real Karina. As expected, the duel ends in a single decisive clash. When the dust settles, our protagonist is the one left standing. Karina turns around, admits her defeat, and thanks him once again. In response, our protagonist reaches out his hand to help her up, saying the feeling is mutual. He then praises her final strike with a wide smile, calling it magnificent. The crowd falls silent because no one expected one of the Radiant Crown to lose to a freshman, let alone a Garuda. Prince Hines breaks the silence by applauding. One by one, the rest of the students join in. As for Van, he has taken another step toward changing the future. We shift to the following day after the duel. As they walk through the academy, Falk and Ralph ask Van about his injuries. Van replies that he is completely fine. The healer treated him without leaving a single scratch. Ralph immediately praises the duel, saying it is unlike anything he has ever witnessed. Falk chimes in, convinced that the battle will go down in the academy's history. However, our protagonist insists they are exaggerating what was only a simple duel. Falk immediately gets in his face and points out that it was anything but simple. After all, Van defeated Karina, one of the Radiant Crowns, speaking of which, Ralph suddenly calls for everyone's attention. It turns out Karina-senpai has been watching them the entire time. The group grows nervous, but our protagonist remains completely oblivious. He simply notes that she seems perfectly fine after the duel. Karina lets out a quiet sigh before walking toward Van and his group, completely misunderstanding the situation. Falk and Ralph assume she has come for revenge. Instead, she stops right in front of them as though she is waiting for something. Realizing this, our protagonist politely greets her while addressing her with the proper honorifics. Crossing her arms, Karina points out that his greeting came last, adding that his poor attitude still has not changed. Van teasingly asks if she is planning to punish him again, but she simply shakes her head. After a brief moment of hesitation, she bluntly asks, her cheeks slightly red, for our protagonist to become her squire. Naturally, both Van and his friends are left speechless by the unexpected request. Normally, a squire serves as a knight's personal assistant while learning the ways of chivalry. However, at the Royal Magic Academy, it is simply a system where a senior student takes a junior under their wing as a mentor. Van quickly realizes this is merely her way of keeping an eye on him. Meanwhile, his two friends see things very differently. Falk, in particular, believes that if our protagonist accepts her offer, no one in the academy will dare cross him because Karina will officially recognize him as her own. Because of that, both boys desperately gesture for him to accept. Still fighting back her embarrassment, Karina proudly declares that he should feel honored by her offer. She announces that she will personally take him under her wing and adds that he should express his loyalty by kneeling before her. Once again, everyone is caught off guard by her bold declaration, while Van can only let out a weary sigh. At first, it looks as though he is about to accept, causing Karina to smile. But in the very next second, he bolts away, insisting that he has no need for someone to keep a constant eye on him. Karina freezes in shock. A moment later, she chases after him while shouting that he cannot escape her guidance. Meanwhile, Falk and Ralph are completely baffled. Seeing Karina acting so lively, they cannot help but wonder if this is really the Thousand-Sword Princess. While all of this is happening, Leonis is absolutely furious that Karina lost to our protagonist. Amelia and Arnold remain silent as he vents his frustration. Leonis admits that he originally thought Helene was merely showing off her family's influence by recommending a Garuda. However, he never expected Van to defeat Karina in front of the entire academy. The kingdom's hierarchy and noble system are built around people who possess magic. In his eyes, a Garuda has no place among them. He grows even angrier, believing Helene's actions are no different from challenging both the nobility and the kingdom's core values. As Leonis continues ranting, Arnold quietly stares out the window. He is also curious about Van, but more importantly, he wonders where Van learned that incredible fist technique. Lady Amelia finally breaks the silence. She acknowledges Leonis's concerns but corrects his final remark, immediately catching his attention. According to her, Van Kruger poses no threat to either the nobles or the kingdom's hierarchy. She reminds him that, as future nobles and students of the Magic Academy, they are being trained to become the shield that protects the kingdom from invasions and demonic beast attacks. In simple terms, someone like Van can accomplish very little against powerful monsters. At best, he can only serve as an assassin. With that, Amelia firmly reassures Leonis that Van is nothing to worry about. Leonis thinks it over for a moment before concluding that she is right. Now, he wants to know how they can make the rest of the academy realize that fact. Amelia calmly replies that the perfect opportunity is arriving soon. Hearing this, Leonis immediately realizes she is referring to the Legion Drill. The Legion Drill is a practical training course focused on monster subjugation, where senior and junior students form mixed squads. Amelia explains that she wants our protagonist assigned to her squad, so she can expose his limitations in front of the entire academy. Leonis smirks, clearly impressed by the plan. However, before he can say anything else, Prince Heinz suddenly enters the room. Leonis is surprised to see him. Meanwhile, Amelia respectfully greets the prince. Even so, she points out that, with all due respect, he does not have the right to enter their private room, prompting Heinz to apologize for his actions. He sheepishly explains that he overheard their conversation and wanted to ask for something. It concerns the Legion Drill. He wishes to be placed under Amelia's guidance. Hearing his request, Amelia asks why he wants to join her unit. Heinz innocently explains that her earlier words deeply impressed him. Moved by his sincerity, Amelia lowers her head and accepts his request. She promises to do everything in her power to prove that magical strength is what truly protects the kingdom. Prince Heinz simply smiles, clearly having achieved his goal. Meanwhile, Karina finally catches up to Van, while our protagonist has no idea what is about to happen next. In the next scene, Helene discusses the upcoming Legion Drill with our protagonist's group. Seeing the confusion on Van's face, Falk briefly explains that the Legion Drill allows junior students to act as commanders. Adding his 2 cents, Van notes that it is simply a way to gain real battlefield experience while learning how to lead an army. Helene agrees but adds that this mission will take place inside demon territory. More specifically, this year's objective is to thin the wild marsh. Assuming Van is unfamiliar with the concept, she explains what demon territory and thinning actually mean. A demon territory is the natural habitat of demonic beasts. When their population grows beyond control, it eventually causes a stampede, a massive migration of monsters. During these stampedes, countless civilian lives and properties are destroyed. That is why regular suppression operations, known as thinning, are one of the Kingdom Noble's primary responsibilities. Van quietly listens to her explanation, deep in thought. Noticing his expression, Helene asks if she said something wrong, but he immediately shakes his head. She continues by explaining that during the drill, Academy students and Kingdom soldiers form a single legion, with the students serving as commanders. Meanwhile, upperclassmen oversee multiple legions and platoons as company commanders. Ralph becomes excited as Helene explains that students who perform well during the exercise will receive a massive boost in their evaluations. After all, the current Radiant Crowns earned much of their reputation through the very same drill. Just then, Falk points out that based on her explanation, the upperclassman's choice of commander is extremely important. Helene smiles and says he is absolutely right. That is why upperclassmen are given the privilege of nominating junior students as their commanders. The moment Van hears about the nomination system, he assumes he will naturally be left out. As if reading his mind, Helene turns toward him with a bright smile and admits that quite a few upperclassmen are actually interested in recruiting him. Van nearly chokes on his tea after hearing that. Helene quickly assures him that it is not a bad thing. On the contrary, many upperclassmen now think highly of him. Both Falk and Ralph agree, reminding him that he defeated Karina in a duel. Helene also brings up the hellboar he killed during the entrance exam, pointing out that everyone in the academy now knows about that achievement. Van quietly listens, unable to believe that he, a Garuda, is finally being evaluated fairly, and that people are genuinely interested in him. In his previous life, something like this would have been impossible. It means he is slowly but surely changing the future. Just then, he suddenly senses someone's gaze fixed on him. Watching from a distance, Leonis is slightly stunned. He wonders if our protagonist somehow noticed his presence. Normally, detecting someone from that distance without using magic should be impossible. That realization only irritates him even more, and he silently swears that he will deal with our protagonist when the time comes. Meanwhile, Helene reassures Van that he will not be mistreated, regardless of which unit he joins. Even so, she sincerely hopes that he and his friends will choose her unit. Naturally, Van's 2 friends are more than happy with the idea. Before Van can respond, Karina suddenly appears and tells him to stop. The entire group is stunned since no one invited her. Without missing a beat, she and our protagonist immediately begin bickering. Karina insists that Van should join her unit as her squire, while Van firmly refuses the idea. Surprisingly, Helene chimes in and agrees to lend our protagonist to her, but Van immediately points out that he is not someone's property. A few days later, the group arrives at the Academy's notice board, only to find a huge crowd gathered around it. Van and his friends squeeze through the students to check which upperclassmen have nominated them. Then our protagonist suddenly notices something is wrong. His expression turns to shock. After a brief pause, he explains that his name is nowhere on Helene's roster. It is not on Karina's roster either. After searching a little longer, he finally finds his name listed under the 5th company. Just as expected, he has been assigned to Amelia's company. However, his 2 friends point out that this is not even the most surprising part. Van has also been placed in the very same squad as Prince Heinz. At that very moment, both Prince Heinz and Amelia arrive, commenting on the remarkable coincidence.